Since my last video about this accident, there have been new developments and additional information is now available as this continues to be a breaking story. Days later, the U.S. Department of Transportation drops preliminary findings that should make every honest person furious. The truck's driver, Harjinder Singh, failed an English language assessment after the crash. 2 correct answers out of 12 verbal questions, and he could identify only one of 4 basic road signs. 1 out of 4. Yet somehow he had commercial driver's licenses from Washington State and California. If you wondered what breakdown in the system means in plain English, that's it. Now it gets worse. Federal law has been unambiguous for decades. To drive a big truck in interstate commerce, you must be able to read and speak English well enough to understand road signs, respond to officials, and make entries on required reports. That's 49 CFR rule, not a suggestion, a requirement. The standard exists because a 40-ton vehicle is not a hobby. It's a projectile. If you can't read no U-turn, you should not be piloting a wall of metal down an interstate. Period. So how did this happen? According to DOT, Washington issued Singh a full-term CDL in July 2023, even though asylum seekers and people without legal status aren't eligible for that license. California then issued a limited-term non-domiciled CDL the following year, which is under investigation for compliance with federal rules. Meanwhile, New Mexico State Police pulled him over for speeding on July 3rd of this year, but did not enforce the very English proficiency rule that, as of June 25th, is supposed to be an out-of-service violation nationwide. 3 jurisdictions, 3 failures, 3 dead. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. The DOT Secretary Sean Duffy did not mince words. He called it a preventable tragedy, born of reckless decisions and non-enforcement, and said states and bad actors would be held accountable. The investigation is targeting both the driver and his motor carrier, White Hawk Carriers, with federal investigators already on site in California reviewing driver qualification files and in-cab video. Good, but let's be honest, accountability after the funerals is not justice, it's triage. Why was New Mexico's lapse so costly? Because in May, DOT and the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance restored English proficiency to the out-of-service list, a hard stop. If you can't demonstrate English competency, you're parked. That went live on June 25th. New Mexico had a speeding stop with this driver on July 3rd, and according to DOT, did not administer the assessment. If they had, he would have been taken off the road. That's straight from the federal government. The policy was in place. The warning lights were flashing. Someone looked away. And if you think this is just a right-wing interpretation, consider the reporting. Major outlets across the spectrum, industry, trade press, and local TV all say same thing. Singh failed the English test after the crash, and he had CDLs from Washington and California. Even the New York Post story, based on DOT's own findings, lays out that he answered 2 of 12 verbal questions correctly and could identify just 1 road sign. That's not spin, that's math. And there is more. Florida officials say Singh entered the US illegally in 2018, was nearly deported, then later obtained a work permit in 2021 under the prior administration's policies, Another chapter in the same story, rules bent, exceptions carved, consequences deferred. Then a minivan hits a trailer. These are not abstractions. They're cause and effect. Florida's leadership responded with fury. The lieutenant governor personally flew to California to oversee extradition. Singh has signed the papers to return to Florida to face 3 counts of vehicular homicide. You should not need the lieutenant governor of a state to babysit an extradition. But here we are. Because trust in the system is so eroded, even basic steps now require a camera crew and a plane ticket. And on the internet, the world's barometer of outrage, drivers and citizens are connecting the same dots. On Reddit, threads and driver forums, people are asking how a person who cannot read basic English road signs passes through multiple state licensing regimes and why an out-of-service rule with a firm effective date was ignored during a stop 11 days later. These aren't conspiracy theorists. They're truckers and locals who live with the consequences of policy on real pavement. Let's talk about sanctuary decisions in practical terms. When states send the message, explicitly or implicitly, that documentation standards are malleable and enforcement is optional, they don't just attract illegal immigration. They attract fraud, shortcuts, and the kind of negligence that gets people killed. You can feel uncomfortable hearing that. Reality does not care. The DOT's own release singles out Washington and New Mexico for violating federal rules tied to this crash. Those are facts, not epithets. The industry itself has been warning about this. Trade publications like Overdrive and Freight Waves are spelling out how the English proficiency rule returned to out-of-service status precisely because inspectors need a bright line tool, the ability to say, this driver is not safe to operate now. That tool existed in June. Why wasn't it used in July? If a rule can be ignored a week after it takes effect, it was never a rule. It was a press release. Some will claim this standard is discriminatory, that it punishes non-native speakers. Nonsense. The rule does not say fluent like a news anchor. It says sufficient to understand road signs, respond to questions, and keep basic records. If you're entrusted with 80,000 pounds on public roads, that's a minimum safety condition like working brakes. The Associated Press itself acknowledged the debate. Some drivers fear subjective enforcement. Others insist it's common sense for survival. Fine, debate the details, but don't pretend this standard is new or invented for politics. It's been in federal code for years. The difference now is whether it's enforced. The truth is simple. 3 people in Florida are dead because states bend the rules. Inspectors looked the other way and federal standards were ignored. If Washington, California, or New Mexico had done their jobs, this crash might never have happened. The evidence is overwhelming. Now, what happens next? DOT says investigators are already reviewing in-cab and forward-facing video, interviewing the driver and company employees, and auditing driver qualification files at White Hawk Carriers, California base. If what they find matches the preliminary report, expect federal actions, civil penalties, possible revocations, and pressure on the states involved to explain how licensing offices treated federal law as if it were optional. If you're a regulator in one of those states, you should probably call a lawyer. This story is not about politics. It's about whether your family makes it home alive. If states can hand out CDLs, like candy if troopers can ignore hard rules, and if the federal government can't enforce its own standards, then our roads are lottery. Sometimes you get home, sometimes you don't. That's not a system, it's chaos. And unless accountability is real, it's not going to stop here. If you found this breakdown helpful and you want to stay updated as more details come out, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps get the truth in front of more people, and you won't miss the next update on this developing story. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.